Sometimes, the darkest darkness is not that which shrouds the night, but what hides in the hidden corners of ourselves. What do you know about fear? What if that fear does not come from the outside, but grows from within, becoming stronger and more real with every beat of your heart? This house, a house that has long been abandoned, holds more than just decaying walls. It is a place where nightmares do not end when you wake. Welcome to a place that will test the limits of your sanity. In the village where I grew up, there was always one story that stood out among the rest, the tale of the old, abandoned house at the edge of town. It was said that the house had been deserted for decades, and locals spoke of it with a mix of fear and fascination. They claimed that the house was cursed, haunted by something dark and malevolent. I was always skeptical, brushing off these stories as mere superstition. However, everything changed one fateful evening. My friends and I decided to explore the house on a dare. As we approached the dilapidated structure, the sky darkened, and an eerie chill settled in the air. The house loomed before us, its once grand facade now covered in vines and decay. The windows, long shattered, stared out like hollow eyes. We entered the house, the floorboards creaking under our weight. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the smell of mold. The walls were adorned with faded, peeling wallpaper, and cobwebs hung in every corner. The atmosphere was heavy, as if the house itself was holding its breath. As we ventured further in, we found a large, ornate mirror in a dusty room. The mirror's frame was covered in intricate carvings that seemed to shift and change in the dim light. We joked about the house's supposed curse, but a chill ran down my spine as I looked into the mirror. For a brief moment, I saw something that made my blood run cold, a dark figure standing behind me, but when I turned around, there was nothing there. We decided it was time to leave, but as we made our way back, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The house seemed to whisper and groan, as if it was alive and angry. That night, I couldn't sleep, plagued by dreams of dark figures in the cold, hollow eyes of the mirror. The following day, I tried to dismiss the previous night's events as a figment of my imagination. However, my curiosity about the house and the mirror grew stronger. I found myself returning to the house alone, driven by an inexplicable urge to uncover its secrets. The house was just as I remembered, silent and oppressive. I made my way to the room with the mirror, determined to investigate further. This time, I noticed something I hadn't seen before, strange symbols carved into the frame of the mirror. They seemed to glow faintly, as if they were alive. As I examined the mirror, I saw my reflection, but there was something off. My reflection appeared distorted, its eyes dark and hollow. I reached out to touch the mirror's surface, and as my fingers made contact, a shiver ran through me. Suddenly, the mirror began to shimmer, and a cold wind blew through the room. I stumbled back, my heart racing. The mirror's surface rippled like water, and I saw glimpses of another world, a dark, twisted version of our own. Shadows moved within the mirror, their forms indistinct but menacing. I felt a pull, as if the mirror was trying to draw me in. Desperate to escape, I turned and fled from the house. I could feel the house's presence pressing against me, its whispers growing louder. As I reached the door, I glanced back one last time. The mirror's surface was now perfectly still, but the feeling of dread lingered. hands jerked back reflexively. A cold, coarse sensation, like decaying skin, touched my hand from behind the mirror. My heart pounded, as if it was about to leap out of my chest. In an instant, the room around me felt colder. A thin mist began to creep into the corners, and the air grew damp, piercing through my bones. I couldn't look away from the mirror. There was something else there, beyond my own reflection. I saw a vague shape behind me, standing in the mist that hung in the air. My eyes were fixed on the shadow, trying to understand what I was seeing. Its form was unclear, shifting between tall and thin and short and stout, but it was always there, watching my every move. I swallowed hard, trying to shake off the fear that was consuming my courage. I turned around to see if the shadow was really behind me or just a figment of my panicked mind. Empty. There was nothing behind me, only dust-covered walls and a window that was starting to mold. But when I looked back at the mirror, the shadow was still there, standing right behind me. I fell backward, almost unable to breathe. Something was terribly wrong with this place. This house, or rather, this mirror held something evil. I crawled backward, trying to distance myself from the mirror, but every move felt slower, as if a force was pulling me back. When I reached the top of the stairs, that heavy feeling struck again. There was something wrong. It felt like there were eyes on me, following my every move. I could sense it, even though there was no one around. Each step towards the front door felt like wading through water, slower and more difficult. Just as I reached the stairs, I heard that voice again. This time, it wasn't footsteps, but a voice murmuring in a language I couldn't understand. The voice came from below, from a darker, colder room. No one had ever told me about a basement in this house. As a child, I remember playing around the house, but no one ever mentioned a hidden space beneath. But that voice, the one that kept whispering, came from below, as if something was calling me from within, demanding to be released. Next to the stairs, I found an old wooden door, almost hidden by a layer of dust and moss covering it. The murmuring grew louder as I approached the door. There was something compelling me from within, something that seemed to demand I open the door and go downstairs. I hesitated for a moment, but then a strange compulsion made my hand reach for the cold, rusty handle. With a groan that was painful to hear, the door creaked open slowly. The stairs descended into darkness, shrouded in absolute blackness. I couldn't see the bottom, but the murmuring grew louder, deeper, as if something was waiting for me down there. I tried to calm myself, reminding myself that this might just be a figment of my exhausted and fearful mind. But every step into the basement felt more real. I felt along the wall beside me, searching for a switch or something that could provide a little light. Nothing. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight. The small beam of light slightly eased my fear, but not entirely. The murmuring was still there, calling from within the darkness. I began to descend the stairs slowly, trying not to step on any weak spots. The air down here was heavier, colder, almost difficult to breathe. Each step felt harder, as if something was trying to prevent me from going any further. But for some reason, I kept moving. When I finally reached the bottom of the stairs, a long, dark corridor stretched out before me. The walls were covered in green mold and damp patches that made me feel even more uncomfortable. to stay lit in the dark. I held my breath, trying to calm the rapid beating of my heart. Whatever was at the end of this corridor, I had to find it. But before I could move further, the murmuring changed. No longer just a whisper, it became a clear and terrifying voice. A sharp whisper filled the entire corridor, calling my name. I froze in place. This couldn't be. I had never told anyone my name since I arrived here. But the voice, the foreign and threatening voice, knew who I was. Return, it said. This is not your place. I felt a bone-chilling cold. Whatever was down here knew I was searching for it. And now, I wasn't sure if I wanted to find it anymore. As I walked down the corridor, I began to feel watched again. There were no visible figures, but the sensation was so strong, as if something was following me at every moment. I looked back several times, but there was no one. The corridors of this house seemed to live, with shadows moving in the corners of my eyes, always escaping direct sight. I remembered the mirror still in my hand. Perhaps this object was the center of all the horror in this house. Somehow, I felt that this mirror was not just a lifeless object. There was something within it, something beyond mere reflection. A force I didn't fully understand. I approached one of the dusty windows, trying to look outside. But outside, a thick fog obscured the view. I could see nothing but an endless gray, making me feel more isolated. I started to wonder if I was truly still in the real world or if I had become trapped in an endless nightmare. Just as I was about to turn away, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. In the fog outside the window, a figure stood motionless, staring directly at me. I backed away quickly, my heart racing. But when I looked again, the figure was gone. I tried to convince myself it was just an illusion. But in this house, nothing could be considered an illusion. My trembling hand touched the old door handle, cold like metal that had been neglected for too long. The carvings on it seemed to move at the edge of my vision, but when I looked directly at them, they remained still as usual. I tried to ignore the odd feeling. Sometimes, darkness could deceive the eyes, I told myself. With a held breath, I turned the door handle, letting it open slowly. The door creaked as if it had not been opened in a long time. Behind the door was a large room darker than the corridor I had just passed through. The light from my phone barely illuminated the room. Yet, in the middle of the room, I saw something, a large black object, like a stone altar. Around it, shadows moved slowly as if they lived outside the light of my phone. I approached the altar cautiously. The darkness in this room felt heavy, more than just the absence of light. There was something lurking in every corner, something I could not see but could feel. The atmosphere made the hairs on my neck stand up. When I reached the altar, I saw it more clearly. On the altar lay an unusual object, a small mirror, very different from the one I had seen before. The mirror's frame was made of old metal, covered with the same symbols as those on the door. I moved closer, staring at my reflection in the mirror. At first, I saw only myself, just like any ordinary mirror. But then, my face began to change. My skin faded, my eyes grew dark, and a terrifying smile appeared on my face, even though I wasn't smiling. I recoiled in fear, but my reflection continued to stare at me with an empty gaze, as if the face I saw was no longer mine. As I was about to run out of the room, something caught my attention, something within the reflection. The shadows around the altar began to move closer, becoming more real. They looked like human figures, but their bodies were blurry, full of darkness. The figures walked slowly, as if they had been trapped in darkness for centuries and were now finally freed. I froze, not knowing what to do. The figures approached me from every direction, their faces not clearly visible, but I could feel their hateful and desperate stares. The whispers in the corridor earlier grew louder, deeper. "You should not be here." The voice was like thousands of voices speaking together, vibrating the air around me. Quickly, I stepped back, trying to find a way out. But the corridor I had previously walked through was no longer visible. Darkness had swallowed everything. I could only feel the cold floor beneath my feet, and the dark figures were getting closer. I grabbed the small mirror from the altar without thinking. For some reason, my instinct told me that this mirror was the key to getting out of here. As soon as my hand touched the mirror, the room began to shake. Darkness around me spun rapidly, like a vortex pulling me into another world. I screamed, but my voice was lost in the growing roar. The dark figures vanished into the void, and suddenly, I felt my body being pulled out of the room, falling into an endless emptiness. I woke up with my heart racing, my breath coming in ragged gasps. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. But gradually, I realized I was back in the room I first entered, the room with the large mirror in the corner. The faint light from a dusty window gave the impression that only a few minutes had passed, though the horror of the previous events felt very real. I stood up, the small mirror still in my hand. But strangely, the room felt different now. There were no more whispers or threatening feelings in the atmosphere. Only a suffocating silence. I stared at the small mirror in my hand and saw my reflection. This time, my face looked normal, but there was something in my eyes I couldn't explain, a faint shadow, perhaps from what I had just seen or experienced. I tried to make sense of everything. Were these events merely hallucinations? Or was there something real about those dark figures? But then, the sound of footsteps grew faintly from outside the room. Slowly, the sound grew clearer, coming from the direction of the stairs. I tried to ignore it, but the sound grew closer, as if something unseen was walking towards me. I stood still, waiting. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. I held my breath, waiting for the door to open, but all I heard was the ticking silence that made my skin crawl. The door suddenly opened slowly, though I saw no one. The corridor outside appeared empty, but the air around me felt heavier. I felt a chill that was colder than before. I stepped out of the room, trying to find a way out. However, the atmosphere in the house had changed. The corridors seemed longer, darker, as if stretching time to keep me trapped here. I didn't know how much longer I could endure this place before losing my sanity. As I walked through the corridor, I began to feel watched again. There were no visible figures, but the feeling was so strong, as if something was following me at every moment. I looked back several times, but there was no one. The corridors of this house seemed to live, with shadows moving in the corners of my eyes, always escaping direct sight. I remembered the mirror still in my hand. Perhaps this object was the center of all the horror in this house. Somehow, I felt that this mirror was not just a lifeless object. There was something within it, something beyond mere reflection. A force I didn't fully understand. I approached one of the dusty windows, trying to look outside. But outside, a thick fog obscured the view. I could see nothing but an endless gray, making me feel more isolated. I started to wonder if I was truly still in the real world or if I had become trapped in an endless nightmare. Just as I was about to turn away, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. In the fog outside the window, a figure stood motionless, staring directly at me. I backed away quickly, my heart racing. But when I looked again, the figure was gone. I tried to convince myself it was just an illusion. But in this house, nothing could be considered an illusion. When I reached the stairs again, I felt a sense of dread. There was something waiting for me there. And indeed, as I arrived at the stairs, standing at the bottom was the figure that had been following me throughout my journey. The black shadow was now clearer. I could see its body outlines, but its face was still hidden in thick darkness. It stood motionless, not moving, but I could feel the malice and despair radiating from it. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The figure began to ascend the stairs slowly, and with each step it took, the surroundings seemed to close in, becoming darker. I backed away, trying to distance myself, but there was no escape. I was trapped in this place, and the figure was getting closer. When the figure finally reached me, I could feel the air around me grow colder. I could not move, could not speak. All my strength drained, sucked away by the presence of the figure. Then, suddenly, it spoke. Its voice was deep and resonant, like thousands of souls speaking together. "You have awakened me," it said. "And now, you will never leave." With a touch so cold it seemed to freeze my heart, I felt the world around me collapse. I was pulled into darkness, with no end, no sound. Only darkness, and whispers filling my head. I realized then I had never truly left this house. The house still stands, silent and deserted on the edge of the village. No one knows what happened inside, and those who attempted to enter never returned with a tale to tell. But for those who hear the whispers in their dreams, they know one thing for sure: something dark resides there, waiting to be awakened by the next unfortunate soul.